Well, hello, welcome again to a reading of 2 Corinthians. I got up to chapter 10, verse 12. Verses 12 to 18 are often described by commentators as a difficult passage, not only in terms of the Greek, which is quite difficult, but also in terms of its meaning and interpretation. So you will need to have a look at commentaries on this. I will just attempt to translate as best I can what the Greek actually says. So it begins, Uga tolmomen enkrinai e sunkrinai hiautus tisi ton hiautus sun histanonton, ala autoi en hiautois hiautus metruntes kai sunkrinontes hiautus hiautois u sun iasin. So for we do not dare, from tolmao is the verb to dare. It's an alpha contract verb. And we get a sort of verbal pun really on enkrinai and sunkrinai. Enkrinai has the sense of to make a judgment about, well, perhaps about oneself. Others have taken it a little bit further and said it means more to sort of put oneself in the same class as someone else, to judge as being part of something or in something. Quite possible. It's got the idea of self-examination and making judgment upon oneself. So we do not dare, I'll translate it as such, we do not dare to make self-judgment. And sunkrinai, on the other hand, means to compare. And to compare hiautus, ourselves. And then we get a dative, tisi, dative from tis, with certain ones among those who commend themselves. It's almost recommend themselves or put themselves forward, commending themselves. Ala autoi, but they themselves, measuring themselves, literally among themselves. So the autois here and in the next part, probably you could read as like alelois, with one another. So but they themselves are measuring themselves against one another or with one another, and comparing themselves literally with themselves, so with one another. So those doing this, sun iasin is the main verb. This is from sun hiami, to understand. This is just the normal present third person plural from sun hiami. So they do not have any understanding, they do not understand. Hemes de uk es ta ametra kalke sometha ala katatometron tu kanonos hu emerisen hemin hothios metru effikestai akrikai humon. Slightly harder verse here. But we will not boast, almost perhaps have confidence in, but we will not boast with regard to things beyond our measure. Now we're getting a kind of pun here again. It's the idea of measure. We're going to get measure here again, and this very strange word canon here. So we do not boast with regard to things beyond our measure, but literally according to the measure of the kanonos. Now a canon, originally in earlier Greek, it meant a rule. It was like our word yardstick. It's something that is an absolute that you compare other things with. So it meant a rule or a norm or a fixed length, hence this idea of measure is being brought in here, or yardstick. It still has this meaning in the Septuagint, although it's not that common there. But the meaning appears to move on in the New Testament to mean here something like a fixed space within the limits of one's power a fixed space within the limits of which one's power and influence is confined, is the dictionary definition of this. A shorter way of saying it is perhaps one's sphere of activity, and you might compare it with our term sphere of influence. And that seems to be the meaning that the word's going to be used again. It's only used here and in verse 15 and in Galatians 6:16. So sphere of influence probably is a good way of translating this here. And there are other translations as well around. So having said all that, let me just translate again. So we will not boast with regard to things beyond our measure, but according to the measure of our sphere of influence, the measure which, we've got the relative pronoun coming before the antecedent, which I think must be here. So the measure which God has apportioned from merisdo, to divide into parts, has apportioned to us. Epikesthai is to reach, akri kai humin, even as far as you. So this akri taking a genitive, it's one of these pseudo prepositions. It means something like as far as. So just to do that bit again, by the way, epikesthai is only here and in verse 14 in the New Testament, but it is a classical word. So we will not boast with regard to things that are beyond our measure, but according to the measure of our sphere of influence, which God has apportioned to, which measure God has apportioned to us, to reach even as far as you. Continuing on with verse 14, Uga hos me ef hiknumenoi as humas, huper ektanomen hiautus, akrigar kai humon, ef thasamen ento euangelio to Christu. And I might pause it there because the next two verses are very difficult. So verse 14, I'll take the main clause first. For we, and the ua goes with the main verb. So we are not stretching ourselves, or perhaps overstretching. It's from huper plus ektano. Tano to stretch, ektano to stretch out, and the huper to overdo it, to overstretch. So for we are not overstretching ourselves as if, for the host, we did not reach as far as you, now we were the first to come, understand, as far as you with the gospel of Christ. Now, a couple of difficulties here. This verb phthano, in classical Greek, it means to anticipate, to get in beforehand. Here, the meaning's a bit weaker, I think, in New Testament Greek. It means something to come first, to be the first to get there, which is a similar meaning, in fact. And the akri again will go with the humon. So we were the first to come as far as you with the gospel, I think the instrumental here, with the gospel of Christ, of the Messiah. So just to do that bit quickly, for we did not overextend or overreach or overstretch ourselves, coming as though, or as if, we did not reach as far as you, for we came first as far as you. I think the akri must go with the humon. So we were the first to come as far as you with the gospel of Christ. Verses 15 and 16 is generally regarded as a very difficult passage, and I'll do my best to translate this. It contains a lot of grammatical difficulties, and also you have to supply various things in it. And it's picking up on various words that have just been mentioned in the earlier section. So, uk eis ta ametra kalkomenoi en allotrios, kopois elpida de ekontes auxanomenes tes pistios hemon, en humin megaluntheni, kata ton canona hemon eis perisean, eis ta hup ekena humon euangelisastai, uk en allotrio canoni es to hetoima kaukesastai. So it's something like not boasting with regard to things that are beyond our measure, beyond our reach, beyond our measure. So not boasting with respect to things that are perhaps almost outside our measure, with regard to things that are not within our measure, in literally foreign labours. In other words, labours belonging to others. This is this allotrios. Classical Greek, it means more the sense of foreign. It's used in that sense. You see the allo root there, but here it's got more the sense of labours belonging to others, having the hope that, and now we get a genitive absolute, I think is what's going on here. So it's auxan from auxano. So it's your faith increasing, genitive absolute. So it's something like if your faith increases. So having the hope that either if your faith increases or as your faith increases, and I think I want to take the en humin with the infinitive here. You could take it with this phrase here, but then it's a little bit redundant. So having the hope that as or if your faith increases, you've got to understand we here. I think that we may be increased or enlarged en humin among you, katatok canona, that's that word I mentioned before. So according to our sphere of influence, if I want to translate canon that way, and then resulting in, for the ace, perisean, perhaps abundance. So just to do that bit again, it's quite difficult. So not boasting beyond our limits, beyond our measure, in regards to labours done by others, but having the hope that as your faith increases, we understood may be increased or enlarged among you in accordance with our sphere of influence, or if you like, within our proper boundaries, within our proper field, resulting in abundance. Now, hup ekena, this is a fairly latish word. I think it means beyond one's region. So regions beyond your borders. Hup ekena, it's a word, no, it is a classical word. It's often used of people who are living several towns away, several cities away. So to preach the gospel with regard, to, in the regions beyond your borders, but to not to boast in the someone else's sphere of influence with regard to things already prepared. So in other words, not to take credit for boast, perhaps. So, but not in someone else's sphere of influence, to boast about in regard to things that have already been done, already been prepared. And then we have a quotation here, which is from Jeremiah 9. The one boasting, let him boast in the Lord. And then verse 18, Uga ho hiaton sonistanon, ekenos estin dokimos, alahon ho kurios son istesin. For the one commending himself, it is not the one commending himself who is tested or tried or tested, but the one whom the Lord approves or commends. And that is the end of chapter 10.